Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel.
All right. Do you have my contact information? Okay.
This is way right here.
Hair or lint?
It's a little lint.
Everybody's wearing, I forget what they put over the mics, the pantyhose looking stuff.
Good afternoon. I'm Floyd Hall, creative producer for Science Gallery Atlanta and the co-curator of the Hooked exhibition season for Science Gallery Atlanta. And I want to welcome all of you here on this panel, but also welcome you all in the audience to Staying Alive in Little Five. This is a pop-up program in support of our Hooked exhibition season. Hooked is the first exhibition for Science Gallery Atlanta. It will be opening in early 2022. Hooked initially ran at Science Gallery London in 2018. And for the Atlanta experience, we are expanding that conversation and unpacking that conversation surrounding addiction, challenging what we think we know about addiction, what we can learn from this conversation around addiction in a variety of forms, from substance use to behavioral addiction and a few other aspects. And so as part of that programming, we have been thinking about and ideating around how do we begin to create a bit of a runway for this exhibition season. And in doing so, we wanted to present some preview programming, if you will, that would tie to what audience members will be able to experience in the next year when the exhibition officially opens. And at the core of the Science Gallery experience is this intersection of art and science and leveraging world-class art to tie into world-class research, but also with our student mediators at the core of that experience and being able to connect what's happening within that conversation to a wider audience of youth and young folks. And so we're pleased to have this particular program, this pop-up program for Staying Alive in Little Five, and I want to allow some self-introductions here, but starting with Sarah Febres-Cordero, whose work, this is the brainchild of a lot of work and years on Sarah's end, so I would love for Sarah to introduce herself, and then we'll go just other introductions from the far end, Shayna, on down. So, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Floyd. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Sarah Febres-Cordero. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Emory University School of Nursing, and I'm the wound care nurse at the Atlanta Harm Reduction Coalition. And I'm going to tell you more about my project after all the introductions. So pass it down to Shayna.
Great, thank you, Sarah. My name is Shayna. I am a student at Emory University. I'm studying film and media studies, and I'm also working with Science Gallery Atlanta as a lead student mediator. And basically, as a student mediator, I just kind of help mediate conversations around the work that is commissioned through the gallery and bring in a student perspective to those conversations.
Hi, my name is Grant. I work at a restaurant here in Little Five Points. Sarah actually used to be my boss. I've been in Little Five Points for about 10 years, and I'm just here to sort of share some of my experiences and perspectives on the subject matter today.
Awesome. I'm Joseph Karg. I am a world-class artist. I teach at Kennesaw State University in their illustration and sequential art department, and I also regularly freelance as a commercial artist for animation and comic books and video games, things along those lines. And yeah, I'm contributing my skills to this graphic novel project, so I'm super excited about it.
Hello, I'm Mona Bennett with the Atlanta Harm Reduction Coalition. I do outreach work every Sunday in Little Five Points, and I sling lots of Narcan.
You do. My name is Robert Clements, and I'm also very similar. I work in the neighborhood, been here since '98, off 4 years till present. I still work in the neighborhood, and I'm gonna try to add like a little bit of input as far as day to day in this neighborhood.
Thank you all for that. I want to just add a bit of context to this conversation. So, as you know, the title of this is Staying Alive in Little Five. And when we thought about the importance of having this conversation taking place in the community, we wanted to situate this dialogue in Little Five Points. So we're currently at 7 Stages Theater in Little Five Points. And it was important for us to be able to sort of bring this into this space so that we wanted to help have the neighborhood and those who have worked in this community sort of present this conversation in this space in terms of site-specific dialogue. And so we are here in front of, as they say, a live studio audience. So we have amazing folks who have come to see this today, some important folks both to Science Gallery Atlanta, as well as the folks who are important to the people here on this panel. So I wanted to at least acknowledge where we are and why we were having this conversation here right now. But I really want to turn this back over to Sarah. But also I want to encourage everyone. This is an open dialogue, and we're going to lead our way through it. So feel free to, I know we have our masks on, so sort of lean into the microphone so we can kind of make sure that we aren't as muffled. But I do want, Sarah, if you could just give some of your backstory, your narrative, your journey, if you will, to kind of get us up to this point.
I'm happy to do that. So before I became a nurse, I am a registered nurse. I guess I should have said that in the beginning too, right? I'm a registered nurse. Before I became a nurse, I worked in Little Five Points for about 20 years with these fine people that you see here. I was a waitress and a restaurant manager, and I kind of grew up in Little Five Points in a way. I was in my early 20s. I came to Little Five Points because I didn't want to work a corporate job. I didn't want to wear a uniform. Little Five Points is this wonderful place that's like mostly independently owned businesses. People come to Little Five Points when they don't want to be part of a dominant culture. I was a bit of an anarchist in my youth, and I didn't want to work for the man. So I came to Little Five Points, right? And all of my friends also were artists, musicians, theater people, filmmakers, a lot of artistic freedom in Little Five Points. So I came to Little Five, and I had found my place in Atlanta. And I worked in Little Five Points, like I said, for a very long time. And during my time in Little Five Points, I was exposed to a drug culture. A drug culture that's been part of the culture of Little Five Points, I'd say since the 70s, when the hippies kind of came in and took over Little Five Points and set up the Bond community and the Savananda Co-op, and it was all free love, and they wanted their marijuana and their LSD, and kind of created a drug culture in Little Five, which Little Five Points is a place where you kind of, there's a lot of tolerance, right? You can come to Little Five Points, you can be yourself, you can drink, you can do drugs and not be judged. And it feels like a safe place to do that. There is a darker side to that though as well. And you know, over the years I had a lot of friends who use heroin and opioids, mostly heroin, and it's taken a toll on our community in Little Five Points. We've lost a lot of people over the years. We've lost many people, lots of friends. We've lost so many. I don't even know, long before any epidemic was declared, we were losing people in Little Five Points to heroin overdose. So when I decided to become a nurse, this kind of was thrust upon me. Like, I wanted to help my community. You know, I care for homeless people in Little Five Points, people with untreated mental health, and I care for the people in my community that do drugs and heroin. And I know it's not a popular thing to say, but I try not to judge anyone for any drugs that they use. And I want everyone to be safe, and I don't think anybody should die from drug use, any drug use. So this has kind of become my calling. And along the way, I met some wonderful people like Ms. Mona Bennett here, who's become one of my mentors in the field. And when I decided to do my dissertation in Little 5 Points, I came back to the neighborhood and I interviewed service industry workers who'd also rescued people from opioid overdose. I found a sample of 15 service industry workers within a couple months, very quickly, who'd rescued strangers from opioid overdose at work. And they shared their stories with me, not just about the strangers that they rescued at work, but some of them, their personal stories, how they'd lost friends, family members, and they just have given so much of themselves. And throughout my whole entire dissertation work, I was always wanting to give something back, you know, like give something back to Little 5 Points. How am I gonna come back to Little 5 Points, share these stories, you know, thank everyone for this work they've done. And, you know, being in Little 5 Points, surrounded by all these artists and all the artwork. If anyone's been to Little 5 Points, there's murals everywhere, graffiti, street art. There's a long tradition of comic book shops, toy stores, record stores. It just seemed like appropriate, culturally appropriate to disseminate my work in a graphic novel. So I had this idea and it seemed so perfect. So while I was doing my study, I didn't waste any time. I needed to find an artist ASAP, so I came to Little 5 Points. And I sat down at Savage Pizza and I waited until I recognized an artist that walked into the door. And that day it was Ashley Anderson, who is a Little 5 Points regular. I don't remember what his order is at the, was it a small Cajun? I don't know.
Yeah, sometimes a butterfugo with mushrooms.
Yeah, butterfugo with mushrooms, right? Because that's how you know people.
We're really putting his order out there.
Come on down to Savage Pizza.
Yeah, exactly. And he walked in the door and I was like, this is perfect. I'm gonna talk to Ashley. And I'm like, Ashley, you wanna do this project with me? And he's like, well, that's not really in my wheelhouse, but I do know someone local who's a sequential artist, and he hooked me up with Joe. And that was how Joe and I met. And I reached out to Joe and we met at a coffee shop and sat down and talked for a couple hours, just kind of getting to know each other, making sure we, you know, had a similar aesthetic and point of view. You know, I wanted to bring somebody in who, you know, wasn't, didn't, you know, I wanted someone with an open mind who could talk about drug use without being judgmental. And Joe and I, we just kind of hit it off, and here we are.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
awesome. In retrospect, it's funny that we didn't meet in Little 5 Points, right?
I know, right?
I mean, because we met close to where I was living at that time, which is closer to Grant Park.
It was close to Grant Park.
But that's, yeah,
But
it was great.
it's something to mention too. Little 5 Points is not a residential area. It is a commercial district, but it's surrounded by many residential neighborhoods. Most of them, some of the fanciest neighborhoods in Atlanta, Emmett Park, Kayla Park, Grant Park. A lot of people who work in Little 5 Points can no longer afford to live around here, unfortunately. But yeah, Mona knows what I'm talking about. But that's where our collaboration began.
Yeah.
Yeah, so how's it been for you?
Oh, man. Amazing. Yeah, I guess I'll start by saying that, like, I think something that I've said this a couple times now in the time that we've been working on this and the opportunities we've had to talk to people, but as an artist, there's not been a lot of opportunity in my career to work on anything that even resembles a project like this, you know? I think there's a lot of kind of like segregation and, you know, like the way that commercial artists just kind of know each other and have a tendency to find similar types of jobs working in the animation industry or the comic book industry or the video game industry, these different places, and that's what each next job, that's where it will come from,
Yeah.
you know? And so I know that you know, I'm in my late 30s now, and somewhere around 5 or 6 years ago, I really started to feel this desire to work on something that felt like a little bit more meaningful, like a subject matter that wasn't just like selling some product, you know? And so I was extremely excited to connect with you and sit down the first time, and even in the first 10 minutes of you telling me what this was, I was like, yeah, 100%, yes, can we draw this? I would like to draw something that like meant something to somebody outside of their love of Batman, you know, or something like that. And it's only been fruitful. I think that, you know, not only do I love working on a project like this, and every next step that we've taken has gotten more and more rewarding, but it's also kind of like galvanized this kind of like feeling inside of me to connect more artists with more people like you. So that's like really such an exciting aspect of like, now that we're working with Science Gallery, and that's like the whole purpose of this, is to take these people that are, you know, researching very serious topics and gathering all this data, and then they're connecting with these artists and producing a product that can make it, hopefully, right, to a new audience that's not accustomed to receiving this kind of data in this package. And so, yeah, it's just so, it's so awesome and exciting. And
and I agree, like, that's part of the reason this project is so important to me as well, is because it is a way to actually bring this to people.
Yeah,
To the actual people from the study. So often science is, you know, people just, they're not getting the peer-reviewed journal.
right.
Or, you know, a lot of work just isn't disseminated to communities the way it needs to be.
Right, and even, I mean, like, I feel like there has been a lot of sort of doors that have been opened in the graphic novel world over the last, let's say, 20 years, where you're seeing more personal stories about serious topics, but more often than not, the way that those are being produced is that the artists themselves have had an experience with drugs, or an experience with suicide, or an experience with a heavier topic that they then are kind of producing this product and putting it out. But I don't think, at least in my experience, I'm not seeing a lot of graphic novels that are, you know, someone who is a very skilled artist being paired with someone who has something really important or special to say to a community. And so I hope that this is not only obviously a successful project for us, but I hope that it can open doors as like just kind of a pathway for more of these things to be made in the future.
Yeah, I agree.
First of all, Joe, you are a world-class artist.
Thank you.
Yes. But Sarah, you talked about maybe what initially drew you to Little 5 Points 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. I would love for either through you or for Grant or for Rob to maybe give us and our listeners or our viewers really a sense of what does Little 5 Points look and feel like right now, in this sort of current moment that we're living through. What is the neighborhood, what does the community feel like currently?
Yeah, I think Rob and Grant probably have something to say about that,
Yeah.
for sure.
Do you want to go, Grant?
You can go first if you like.
Well, I see it every weekend. I see it Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And I was thinking about this earlier when I was taking, a minute to kind of be like, what do I talk about? Like, what is the thing that I could bring up that would make any sense? And I was thinking about, how did it change? How many, over the years? Now, in case it's not known, I'm in recovery. I've been dealing with drug addiction. I'm 52, and I've been dealing with it for 13 years. I'm free of drugs, but it's always in the back. And people ask me all the time, how'd you stop doing that? How did your brain just say, I don't want to do this drug anymore? Well, it's a big, gigantical story. It's too big for this panel, but it is part of each and every addict. There's either a decision to do it or don't. And sometimes those decisions come elsewhere. What I've seen is, as my decision came, I saw society changing a little bit, just small, tiny amounts. Not relative to things like acceptance, not relative to things like, me and Sarah speak constantly about things like shaming, the concept of having the shame as an addict, and that just carries you further and further into different directions. Some people, they shame, they go and say, I'm done with this. Some people get shamed and they fall harder into it. What I'm seeing is people are aware of drug use. They're aware that it's everywhere around them, but it's who has the time? Who has the time, right? Who has the time to actually go out there and really, really face this problem? I guess to put it really quickly is, what I've seen over the last like 10 years, and specifically Little 5 Points, because that's all I can really speak on, because that's kind of my home, and I work there so often, is I think people are becoming a little more aware that there's the shame is where we got to pull the shame back from the problem. Once that comes back just a little bit, then we can start talking about those other things. But until that part comes, then it's really just an individual. Like, I'm one person and I see it every weekend, and and I do see it pretty much every weekend. I mean, it's last Friday I saw it again, another person standing in my parking lot, nodding to try to drive their car, and I can't really do anything about that, but all I can do is approach them and say, look, please, give me, take a minute, man. There's no police here. There's no shame.
Right.
There's no detriment to your freedom. You're not going in handcuffs. I just want you to not go out there and hurt yourself or someone else.
Right.
So those little, I'm sorry if that's too over, worded, but that makes, to me, that's what I'm seeing is, maybe as the individual doesn't get shamed into feeling like I'm a criminal and I'm going to go to jail and there's no other option for me, you can go to my parking lot in Little 5 Points and you can do drugs. I would rather you sit in your car and relax and calm down and get your head together than drive out. So does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
The shaming is the number one agenda, to me, because every time everyone's like, oh, you're the police, or you're gonna do something to me, and it's like, I just want you to be well, and not only well, but I also want you to maybe find a place to be. So shame mixed, it's such a conundrum.
complicated,
It's a
yeah.
conundrum, but that's the best I have for that.
Well, yeah, that's part of the work we do as well, is we're trying to they always say we need to reduce stigma surrounding drug use, because stigma acts as a barrier to recovery and care. So how do you reduce stigma? How do you reduce shame around drug use? Honestly, it's tough because we're taught these things from a very young age. This is what we're taught in school as young people, and they still this rhetoric is still happening within our schools, that drugs are bad, no one should ever do drugs, and that's just not reality. We're taught very young that this is how we should think about drug use. In Little 5 Points, it's interesting because I think people come to Little 5 Points and they feel like they can do these things in Little 5 Points for a myriad of reasons. And maybe one of them is there's less shame there. But it is a barrier, and I'm hoping, by making art that depicts people who use drugs as human beings, not animals, not zombies, that is a step in the right direction. But it is a tall order. How do you destigmatize drug use, especially when we're talking about injection drug use?
No, I've always said that little line
Yeah,
is
that's the line.
it's as the gateway drugs, right? As they say, oh, you start with alcohol, you end with weed, and then now it's cocaine and blah blah blah. This situation is far greater than that. And I've lived in, just to get that real quick, I've been out of Atlanta. I, started in Little Five Points and then moved to other cities. I went to San Francisco, New York, Miami, back to Miami, here. I've seen drug addiction in different communities. I was far more addicted to drugs in other cities than I was here, because Atlanta, it's seemingly like you can come to Little Five Points and find anything. That's not true. It is not true. I would know it, believe it or not. I would know it even as a recovering drug addict. I would know immediately who's selling these drugs in my neighborhood. But I realized a long time ago, that's not the target. The target isn't who's selling them, it's who's using them. And who's using them, do they have the facility and facilities, if you will, to do this without immediately, again, being ostracized, dirty needles, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many things that lead to a person becoming and being an addict for a really long time. Because I really believe this. Now, I'm, like I said, 12 to 13 years in total no drug use. And people ask me all the time, how'd you do that? I didn't go to a rehab. I sat in my room and I dealt with it.
Right.
Okay? I didn't have anyone on my side. I didn't have anyone that could, give me something to calm down. No, I just went through it. And it was circumstantial. It was certainly circumstantial. If I was given another option, I would have kept doing drugs, I'm sure of it. But I wasn't given that option. So my decisions now have led me this many years out to say, well, how did I do that? Because what am I? I'm like the one person or the two, or the small percentage of people that can just go, no more. No, it comes so deeper than that. And when you look at society's way of treating an addict, that is not ever on the table, ever, for them. That anyone will accept, they're going through pain, anxiety, all these things that are going through addiction, it's off the table for them. It really is. And so it is I am probably one of the smallest percentiles of people that escape drug addiction based on the fact that circumstances dictated.
Right.
And then I had enough will in me to continue. So with those two things together, and this is what we're saying about shaming, if you can remove that, you make that percentile even higher, that this person will recover.
Yeah.
It's within that realm.
So when it comes to like the shame and stigma of opioid use, from my perspective, it's funny because if you're not familiar with how Little Five Points are, how me and Rob have interacted in the past, he runs the parking lot outside of the restaurant that I work inside of. So he sees a lot of what I see from outside the restaurant's perspective, and then I only see pretty much the people that come through our doors. And in my experience, being a restaurant that has, single, what is it called? Like
Single stall
bathrooms, where you can go in there, you can lock the door and be in a private place. It's something that, as I was trained in the restaurant, you always say okay, the bathrooms are only for customer use. Don't let strangers from the street come in and use the bathroom unless they're purchasing something. And that's really to sort of filter out the people doing undesirable things in the privacy of our restroom. I'd heard stories of people ODing in our bathrooms before, and the fire department having to come out and take the hinges off the doors to rescue the person. There was one experience, and you sort of get, over time, you sort of start getting a feeling. Like, you see somebody walk in the door, you see them kind of darting that direction, and you start kind of filtering out people. Like, you can tell what somebody looks like when they just need to pee really bad. They have that sort of look on their face, or doing a little dance. You're just like, okay, this, you know, it's fine. But then you see these people that are like going in, they have a bag on, they're, you know, like there's various like little tells, you know.
I call them vibrations.
Yeah, exactly.
You could see someone driving in. I mean, for
Yeah,
me in
it's
the
like you-
parking
you
lot,
just
I can
kinda
see
know.
someone drive in, and the way they drive in, the speed, I'm like, pharmacy.
Yeah,
Wow.
because
So I could already tell.
that's the other thing, is that in our parking lot, and just 2 doors down, or 2 or 3 doors down from our restaurant in the strip mall that we're in, is the little 5 Points Pharmacy, which has had a needle exchange program for years, like
Many,
first
many,
one in
well
China,
over,
as far as
well
I'm
over
concerned.
15,
Well,
you know,
Mona-
legally as
So
far
yeah,
as,
so Mona's worked
and
yeah,
she
with the
knows.
pharmacy.
oh, she knows a lot more, yeah.
But the result of,
Like for this, yeah.
but my experience though is that the result of that is that you'll have people who have just scored, you know, some drugs, and then they've gone to the pharmacy and they've gotten their clean needle, and then the next step is that they're looking for a place to shoot up.
Right.
And a lot of times that place is going to either be in their car in the parking lot,
Mhm.
or it's going to be in the nearest single stall bathroom, which is us.
Yeah.
So they're coming out of the pharmacy, walking down, coming in our door. So you know you're looking for these little pharmacy bags, that kind of thing, and you're trying to prevent them from going in there. You know, you want them to not go in there because you don't know what they're going to do in there.
But it's funny you say customers only, though. I mean, all you have to do to become a customer
Is to
is
buy
come in
something.
and buy a soda,
Exactly.
and then you can go use the bathroom anyway.
Right.
So
And then
like,
you're not
it really
suspicious to
doesn't
us.
deter
Right,
right.
anybody from
But
using the bathroom. And there's been a lot of studies that talk about single stall bathrooms, like in New York City and like subways and everything. It is, like you said, a place that for privacy,
exactly.
right?
But I can think of like a specific example where this woman had come in and she really seemed like she was struggling. And I got these vibrations, like Rob says, like I get these vibes from her that she's there for one reason. You know, she's going straight to the bathroom, she's got her bag, she looks desperate, you know, like it just, like red flags are going on. And I'm like, hey, like you can't use the restroom, you have to leave, like please don't go in there. And she's like looking at me like, what is this guy's deal? Why is he stopping me? What is his business? What does he know that I don't know? That like, what is triggering him to come at me like this? And I'm coming from this perspective of I don't want to deal with your mess, you know, in a way. Like I don't want to have to deal with the repercussions of if you do go in there and something bad happens to you. Like, you know, because we're the people who have to deal with it, ultimately. And basically, she more or less, she straight up asked me, she goes, like, do I look like a junkie to you? And all I could think of was, well, what does a junkie look like? You know, like, you can't, like, there's not, like, you know, a
No.
picture of somebody in the dictionary next to junkie, you know? And,
No.
like, that's, like, the stigma is, like, you can't just, like, profile someone.
Oh, by the way, I've made a terrible amount of mistakes when I've seen cars going by with
yeah.
people that have that, what I call the vibe
Look,
to them.
yeah. Sometimes it's
They'll be
not-
going by, oh,
something
they're
different.
going there. And then when I catch myself, right, and I'm an ex-addict, so who am I to say anything to anyone? But I'm judging people on what I, you know, it's profiling.
It is
It's a
profiling.
profiling mentality. It's like if your bumpers are all smashed, you know, the car looks all like kind of nondescript, and you just drive by, and you know, you can make terrible mistakes based on those one basic things, because it's not the same over and over. I've seen it on both sides of the coin. I've seen a Rolex,
And you don't want to be like
Diamond,
accusing someone
etc.
if you don't know.
Exactly.
For sure. You know, you don't want to have an accusatory tone or
Right.
you know, like just automatically assume anything about someone.
What do you think, Mona?
It's
Come
really
on,
hard to
on
give
that.
them a
What do
chance.
you think of profiling, Mona?
Don't do it.
Yep, there you go. Yeah, it's so
It's
easy.
a terrible
Well,
idea.
that's
Do it,
when
yes.
you're balancing commercialism and these social issues, right? But
Yes, because people in really nice cars drive up to our outreach. We have 2 outreach sites, and at both sites, we see really nice cars drive up and people coming to our outreach.
I think
Mona,
that's
Mona, I'm sorry. I would love for you to just maybe give some more backstory about the Atlanta Harm Reduction Coalition, and just all of your work, and you really just frame up what you've been doing, your history in this advocacy and really help us understand really what your role has been up to this point, just so we can all kind of understand all that you do.
All right, thank you. The Atlanta Harm Reduction Coalition has been around for about 27 years. We've been working in Little 5 Points about 5 years, and we've run Georgia's oldest syringe service program. People bring in used syringes, we give them sterile syringes. That helps cut down on a lot of stuff: HIV, viral hepatitis, bloodborne STIs, and we also sling a lot of Narcan. Because that's why we started in Little 5 Points long ago, and we came back to Little 5 Points because we were hearing so much about people overdosing in restrooms. And we started getting requests for sterile syringes. So it was time to come back to Little 5 Points and reduce the harm in the community. Again, we hand out a lot of Narcan, and we're just trying to help people save their own lives, preserve their own health, and come up, as it's put in the streets. People improving their lives in the way they wish to improve their lives. We've also, with our statewide partners, Georgia Overdose Prevention, we've been through the community training staff on how to use Narcan, how to recognize an opioid overdose, and how to respond. You had a group of nursing students do some training and distribution in Little 5 Points, didn't you?
Yeah, actually, my colleague, Dr. Daniel Smith, he is the second clinical instructor that brings students from the School of Nursing. That is one of our goals, yes, is to train nurses in harm reduction. Train nurses how important Narcan is, syringe exchange. You know, I didn't learn about harm reduction in nursing school, so
Can I
trying
say
to bring
something
that
really
into
quick?
yeah.
I was thinking about this morning while I was taking a shower about this, and I was wondering, I was like, oh, I wonder if this question will come up. So my first overdoses, this didn't exist. This wasn't around. There was no help. It was a person would be just abandoned, and or even in my own circle, you would just get scared and run. I could give you a statistical number of how many people I've helped without this, and how many people I've helped with this. And I've only ever known, and it wasn't even in my presence, one person with Narcan went to the hospital and they passed away. 20 were saved.
Yeah.
So, you know, before that, there was a loss, which is actually in this graphic novel. It's in this graphic novel. I left my job for 3 years because of an addiction or an overdose. I was still going through my, recovery, and I had to bear witness to someone die there. If this was available, that would not have happened. And I'll tell you, that's what I wanted to say, at least about Narcan. It's given us locally a better chance at helping people before first responders arrive. If we have that ability, it's definitely better. So I just want to say
Yeah,
that.
it's been a game changer.
Absolutely.
Yes, and this is so easy to use. It's a nasal spray. Nasal Narcan goes up the nose. We've had single-digit aged children save their parents, save their relatives, because they had the simple instructions of, if mommy or daddy turn blue, go find this, stick it up their nose, squirt it up their nose. And it's very easy to use. No scary needles. You just stick it up somebody's nose and squirt it up their nose. Yes, it is a game changer. So we have to make sure that everybody who knows, everybody who has a use for this has access to it. In Little 5 Points, you can go to the Little 5 Points pharmacy and request a box, a 2-dose kit of Narcan. I just brought a whole bunch there to the pharmacy. There's a community expectation if someone is overdosing on an opioid in Little 5 Points and the pharmacy is open, you can come and get a box of this and go help reverse that overdose. And again, you can just go to the pharmacy and request a box. I give out a ton of this on Sundays, 11 a.m. to 12:30 behind the clothing warehouse, Seminole Avenue if you're driving. Just have this. And if you think you don't need it, you never know. The holidays are coming up. Maybe someone's grandparent is on an opioid painkiller, and little Junebug, little grandbaby, loves grandpa, loves to do what grandpa does, see grandpa taking these pills. Who can get into childproof caps faster and easier than anyone? Children. So, little Junie gets into those pills, maybe just takes one, a half, but still, for little Junebug, that's too much. And then cousin comes along, little Junebug is turning blue. Have some of this around if you have opioids in your house, in your presence, in your universe for any reason.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of this work too is we need to normalize Narcan. Like, Narcan is something that should be in like every first aid kit. Something that's in everyone's vehicle. I mean, the reality of the world we live in is people need Narcan. You can be driving down the street and see someone blue on the side of the road.
Right, yeah.
Well, I think that two goes is, she said, if it's a pill, right? So now we've taken away from the needle in the corner, right? It's a pill in grandma's,
Well, that's part of
something.
normalizing, yeah.
And then the next level is,
definitely.
just like a Band-Aid. I mean, people would say you didn't need smelling salts at a certain point, but, it says a lot that this is what we need in our first aid kit.
Yeah.
There's no wrong with that, but it's important to, I think that's an important thing to say. Pardon me.
Also, this past summer, there were a rash of opioid overdoses and opioid overdose deaths from people using cocaine, a stimulant.
Yeah.
They weren't expecting that in their stimulant.
Right.
We did, it was Atlanta Harm Reduction Coalition, Georgia Overdose Prevention, and I think I'm forgetting some other folks, joined together with the Star Bar to do this Narcan training and distribution. And we did it a couple of times in some other neighborhoods because there were just these rashes of fentanyl-laced cocaine, and fentanyl is a very powerful opioid. There's one called carfentanil. It's an elephant tranquilizer. There are all kinds of, or analogs of fentanyl, and you just never know what's in what these days. So get your Narcan.
Yeah.
We give it out for free, the nice price.
Yes.
I want to just I want to give Shayna a chance to sort of enter into this conversation in a second. But I think when it comes to how we're capturing a lot of this conversation and interpreting that in a way that is represented through art. And I'm curious, Joe, as you've began to talk to Sarah, as you've had all these other conversations, as you're sort of processing the role of service industry workers in many ways as first responders, but just as you're thinking about this particular time that we're living in, and how are you creating with this in mind. Would you just maybe sort of give some perspective of what it's been like to synthesize all of this, create this work in a way that hopefully, reflects and provides a platform for these stories on this panel to be out into the public?
Yeah, 100%. Even today, as everybody's talking, it's compounding the kind of multifaceted kind of plate spinning that has to be done when you are, when you're putting together a narrative that is meant to kind of go out and educate the public, right? To make sure that you're telling this story in a way that's going to have the greatest impact and the least harm. And certainly, one thing that I get the feeling like you're talking about now is like, what you definitely don't want to do is to perpetuate any negative stereotypes, right? Like, you don't want to take anything that's already complicating the narrative and emphasize that, right? Or make that any worse in your work. The other thing that it makes me think of, and the thing that this project kind of like keeps bringing up for me, is that this is a narrative problem. So many of these things have to do with the way that our culture learns new information and then sort of holds on to that. For me, I know it comes a lot from television, film, documentaries. Now there are these kind of like nonfiction graphic novels. These are important places to like learn about something and go, oh, I didn't know that. Now I know that. I read a graphic novel a couple of years ago called Blue Pills that's all about a relationship between a woman with HIV and a man without HIV, and that they fall in love and that they can have this life together, and that they're going to the doctor and he's learning all the safety precautions and all this stuff. But by the end of the graphic novel, in my mind, I go, I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know that there were people that had HIV and people that didn't have HIV that were falling in love and having a safe relationship with one another. And now there's this narrative that tells you that in a clear and factual, but also kind of beautiful and romantic way, right? I didn't know about Narcan before this project. I'd never heard of that. I think that I had a picture in my mind that probably a lot of people my age at least do, which is that if somebody's overdosing from heroin, that you have to get this huge needle and shove it into their chest, like the movie Pulp Fiction.
Sure, yeah.
And that's the only way to save them. That's the only way to save them, right? And it's like, it's because that's the image,
That's
right?
how powerful
That's how
the
powerful
pop culture is.
that pop
yes.
culture is.
Yeah,
I'll tell you another
it is.
thing, and it was something.
No needles to the heart, okay? No needles to the heart. That's why we have Narcan.
Which is, in a way, it makes me think, like, I wonder if the only reason that that's not in a film already is because it's not dramatic enough,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's
No, I think you're
unfortunate.
absolutely right. I think that's what the protocol
Right,
is
right.
everything is, and again, when I say demonizing something or, shaming something, it's very,
Right.
that needle in the heart thing
Right.
looks way better than that little thing
Right,
up your
of
nose,
course.
and all of a sudden you're back.
But then,
Drama.
Yeah,
So-
drama.
I'm thinking in the last 2 years of 2 films that came out that dealt with drug addiction, and one was in a way that has been very typical, at least in this culture, which is the movie Beautiful Boy. Do you know about this? It's this Timothy Chalamet movie about a kid who, goes further and further down this path of addiction, how his father's trying to get him back. But the whole breadth of the movie is the picture that I think most people have of what it's like when somebody falls into drugs. And something that I found really shocking at the end of that film was that he, spoiler alert, he doesn't die. It's based on a true story. And it's only in that last, part of the movie where they say this is what happened after the end of this movie, that it says that this character has gone on to live another 15 years drug free.
Right.
And I go, that's the movie. How did he do that?
Yeah.
Like, instead of showing this narrative that we're all familiar with, where somebody falls into drugs, it gets worse and worse and worse until you suspect that they're gonna die. They often in the movie do die, and then it's this cautionary tale. Tell the story of how someone can live after that and find normalcy in their life. And this other film that had come out was a Spanish movie where the main character is a film director who's been using heroin for 15 or 20 years in the movie. I remember watching that movie thinking to myself, I didn't even know that was possible.
Oh, it is, and it comes from, and I, this is the one thing I didn't want to talk about, too much, because it was more of like, if the question got brought up.
Yeah.
But are there functional drug addicts?
Right.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Right, exactly. But
I
we
mean,
don't.
I know plenty of them. The
Yes.
only time that drugs become a problem is when, especially with heroin, specifically with that drug, is when it's unavailable. As soon as it's unavailable to the user, then the problem starts. I have friends that own businesses.
Sure.
I mean, big businesses. They've been running them forever, 45 years. They've been on drugs for 45 years, but they have a constant truth.
Right,
As soon as that truth gets twisted, then it falls apart. And that's when that narrative of
Yeah.
both sides, whether it's, I just wanted to.
Yeah, no,
pardon.
that's great. And I'll end my thing so Shayna can talk now too, just by saying like these narratives that are outside of the expected narrative is what I'm most interested in. And so far, this is the work that Sarah and I have been doing together. Every single time we start to work on new pages, I have to it blows my mind what story is being told, because it's a version of heroin use or a version of drug addiction that it's a narrative I'm unfamiliar with, and then I have to familiarize myself and then package it in a way that is respectful to everybody involved, and also hopefully
It's a difficult job.
it's
It's a difficult job.
Well, yeah, and you gotta give a lot of feedback too.
I was gonna say, like, as far as the popular narrative is with this, something that I've heard over the years as it relates to Narcan, which it's probably not necessarily true, and I'd actually like to hear what you have to say about this, Mona, is that this argument of if you provide a safety net for people, will they just use more knowing that they can be revived? Will they push it extra hard? Will they do more of the drug knowing that if they die that someone will revive them? And is that not encouraging them to go further than they might have already gone if they didn't have that safety net?
Encouraging drug use, encouraging sin.
This is a great question for
It's
Mona.
not necessarily my
No, it's a good
but it
one.
is
I like
It's a
this.
question
I like
that
this
comes
question
up
a lot.
Over and over and over again. Are you?
I love that question.
Yeah, you have to talk about
Yeah.
it. A lot of people have that mindset.
All right. A little bit of science, just a little bit. Let's see. Oh, yeah, I still have it. We humans, and probably anybody with vertebrae, have opioid receptors. Got a lot of them in our brains. All right, opioid receptor. Opioid. Whoops, I don't know where it went. This will be my opioid. Yeah, this will be, okay, opioid receptor, opioids. When all your opioid receptors get full, oh, thank you. That's when the overdose starts and your breathing slows down, among other things. That's what kills you. Respiratory depression?
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, your breathing slows down and it stops. That's what kills you. So, all your opioid receptors are filled and they're all along your central nervous system, but again, there's a whole lot in the brain. Breathing slowing, turning blue and gray and purple and pinpoint pupils, all that. Narcan to the rescue. It temporarily, 20 to 90 minutes, knocks the opioid off the opioid receptor and binds more tightly. So don't run, call 911. Because again, this only lasts from 20 to 90 minutes. You want to get someone to the hospital. Georgia law protects you if you're giving aid to someone with any drug-related medical emergency, but it's especially handy with opioid overdoses. So, now the thing is, when all those opioids get knocked off, all those opioid receptors, the person being reversed is not going to feel good. They're going to feel pain. They're going to go into opioid withdrawal. That is not fun. In fact, when assessing an opioid overdose, you're shaking them, you're rubbing their sternum real hard with your knuckles, digging those knuckles, and you can also say something like, if you don't wake up or respond, I'm going to Narcan you. And if they have any bit of consciousness to them, they're gonna respond. No, don't Narcan me. This is painful. People go into withdrawal, so it is not fun. And I don't want to hear any more about the Narcan party mess. No. This isn't fun. Being Narcan isn't fun if you have any kind of opioid dependency. That is a myth.
It is a bit, and that's the thing, I don't think Narcan, one second, enables people to use more because, like Mona says, nobody who uses drug wants
This is what-
Narcan use on them. Nobody.
It enables people to breathe after
Yes.
they have had an opioid overdose. That's the one thing that this medicine does.
Agree.
I'm just sorry. I really just want to get Shayna a chance to join the conversation here. But really from the perspective of, I think, a younger audience that maybe is receiving lots of different messages from a few different sources, and I really wanted to kind of like insert this into the dialogue as we sort of are continue the conversation.
I guess like this is not answering your question at all, but just going off of what Joe said, I had a thought on that. If people want to jump back on that education on Narcan, that was an important topic. If there was last minute things you wanted to talk about.
The last thing I just wanted to say was to you, I think your question was, do you think by providing these things and by providing needles and so forth, that was what you were saying?
Yeah, because it's like.
Does that make it?
Does it make the situation worse at the same time?
No, it absolutely does not. That's my opinion, and I think the majority of people would agree that by providing these things to people, to say that, if you could go into a bathroom and pull a needle out and just shoot up in the bathroom. Well, the reality is if you could get that, then why would you do it in a bathroom? You would do it at your house. I mean, I always ask this one question, and I don't want to, I do want to hear from you so much, but I do, this is like my last bastion here. I don't believe that. I think it blows my mind when I see it in the parking lot, right, in front of our job. I say, why would you do that? Why would you spend all that money to go get high and now you got to drive home?
Right.
Like, why wouldn't you just get the drugs and do it in your house? Well, the reality is that's the desperation and the anxiety. So the same thing goes for that, in my opinion.
Yeah,
That's
and
just
I'm
purely my
glad that
opinion.
Grant brought it up because, even though that may or may not be the way we all feel about that here, that is always part of the conversation, right? That's the people that we're trying to educate. And, those people, the people who have that mindset are gonna be the hardest people to educate and change their minds. It's gonna be tough. So Shayna, I'll hand it back to you.
Just kind of going back to what Joe said about delving into a different narrative that's not typical when exploring people who use drugs and addictions in general. I thought the thing that I found most interesting with this graphic novel project is that it often starts from the perspective of the service industry workers and then goes into how their interactions with customers who are either in the process of using, are going to use, or are experiencing an overdose, and how I think the choice to start from a perspective of a community member as a service industry worker really emphasizes the fact that the issue of the opioid crisis and just illicit drug usage in general is not a private issue. It affects the entire community. It involves everyone. And I think that even hearing Mona say that you can just go to the pharmacy and get a Narcan if you see someone, that's an incredible thing to have. And seeing the community come together and support each other and be there it's really heartwarming to see that it's because there's a lot of messages that drug users are alone, they're isolated, and it seems like Little 5 Points creates a community so that no one does feel alone. whether it's in their drug use or in however they choose to express themselves.
Yeah.
Could I?
I have some thoughts about this too. So I think
Yeah.
about little 5 points, and Rob may disagree with me. I think Little 5 Points is a wonderful community. I think harm reduction is happening in Little 5 Points, and not everyone. I know what Rob was going to say. Not everyone in the community of Little 5 Points agrees or wants to be involved with harm reduction. But I think in a way, Little 5 Points has become a safer injecting community. Kind of like how they have safer injecting spaces in other countries. You can go to Little 5 Points. You can get a clean syringe, a sterile syringe. I'm sorry, I don't like to use the word clean. That is a stigmatized word. I'm still learning myself. You can get Narcan. People have Narcan on hand there. It is wonderful, but as Rob will tell you, not everyone in Little 5 Points feels the same way. But I think there are always going to be people. Go ahead.
No, my only disagreement was, the loneliness. I think every addict, even when they're doing it with another person, and most addicts always, everyone I've known, and myself included, started with someone else. I mean, so I didn't just like wake up one day and go, oh, like, I'm gonna go find this crazy thing to do to my body. It was brought around, but loneliness does come into play, and I think it's maybe you might have some people around you that are, a group. Oh, that guy can score and he can get the needles, and that person, but eventually it's very lonely. Yeah, I think almost any addict would say, even with the person next to them, it's extremely lonely.
Yeah, isolating.
It's
Alone
funny.
in a crowd.
Yeah.
Funny that you mentioned that, because it's like it's this sort of thing where, like, if you're surrounded by other people that are using, or if you're friends per se with your own drug dealer, say you see your drug dealer as a friend,
Yeah.
or people that you use with as friends. But then as soon as perhaps, you get clean, or you move away from this habit, or, if whatever happens, you start realizing, say you stop doing that drug, and then all of a sudden you realize you have nothing in common with those people, outside of the drug,
Right.
and all of a sudden you realize that they're not really your friend.
Right.
They're not there to support you. They don't really care about you as a person, other than the fact that you're getting high together.
Yeah. You can cop. You're the you could be the catalyst for the day. Oh, he's going to get it, and we can hang out. He's providing the environment. Yeah, but again, even in that environment, for me, it's just, I'm speaking specifically for me, no one else. Even in a room full of other addicts or whatnot, I always felt alone. Always. Never once felt at home.
Yeah.
Is it okay if I make one more, change the subject? We good with that? Okay. Sarah touched on this briefly earlier in the conversation, but I think one thing that's interesting is just kind of thinking back about how, all the discourses I've had around addictions and drug usage, just growing up through the educational system, through the public education system, and I've been kind of inundated with just messages of drugs are bad. Drugs are bad, period. Don't use them. We would have it would be kind of a fear-mongering tactic of the extreme will happen. Yeah, exactly.
Dare.
And it was
Dare.
it was I was not a part of a DARE program, but it was basically
It's
DARE.
basically
Yeah,
DARE.
yeah,
Yeah.
they just
It's all
dropped
DARE.
the name. But it was very much do not use, and if you do use, you're kind of helpless. You're kind of, even if you just use once, you're going to end up.
Well, that's the
down
thing.
the road.
We don't
Yeah.
talk about why people use drugs.
Yes.
Why do people use drugs? And yes, we know the narrative. Oh, I've had a lot of trauma. I have untreated mental health, so I self-medicate. But we don't talk about drugs are fun, and it might be a rite of passage in our country for young people to use drugs. That,
That's a good point, because we grow up in the same vein as we measure one thing against another. It's keeping up with the the next people. So if your neighbors have a really cool lawn, you're gonna do it. You go to school, right, as a young person, and that person's like, oh, smoke this, and you're like, oh, yeah, and I'm talking about a cigarette, which is, to me, like,
Well, and alcohol.
I mean,
is probably
I'll just
different.
put this on the table real quick. I've quit heroin for 13 years, but I can't stop smoking cigarettes for the life of me. Why? Because I think when you walk down the street, you do occasionally around this neighborhood, you'll see a needle, but you see far more cigarette butts than needles. So in bottles of liquor and et cetera, et cetera. So these are acceptable drugs.
Right.
Whereas the other one is still.
That's exactly the thing. There's acceptable drugs and there are unacceptable drugs. Alcohol is an acceptable drug.
Exactly.
Other drugs are unacceptable. And we don't talk about all the reasons why people do drugs.
Right.
You know, the good, the bad, the ugly. We don't talk about how it's part of our culture as a country for people to experiment with drugs. And you have to hide them if there's certain drugs.
You used a
and then
great
you
word.
don't have to
It
hide
was
them if there are
fun.
others.
The first time I did drugs, I wasn't like sitting in my room depressed, like, oh, what can I do to help myself? No, I was at a party. I was with friends, and I was like, oh, yeah, let's have fun. Fun was the original,
Right.
and then it becomes a
Yeah,
personal.
for some people, yeah, you have like however many people start, it's fun, and then for some, it changes their life forever in this
Right.
negative way.
Some are alcoholics, some
Right.
can generally drink a couple.
But
we
we
have-
must not discount pleasure in drug use. We must face that reality. RuPaul said it best. Drugs are fun.
Yeah, it has to be part of, again, to normalize,
Sure.
to decrease stigma, to admit as a culture that these things happen. And it's part of our human nature. And if we can break down some of these walls, it makes it easier for people who really need help to go to recovery.
Yeah, and
Just
I
one-
see it, sorry, Floyd.
No, go ahead, Shana, go ahead.
I see it like, in a way, kind of tied to like the conversations around sex, like in public high schools of like, no, you should just do abstinence, period. Don't do anything. And then like, now it's been, yes, exactly. And now things are opening up a little bit. We're like, okay, still we recommend abstinence. That's
Right.
the only way to avoid anything. But like, here is the birth control options just in case
Right,
you choose.
harm reduction.
Right, the harm reduction. So I feel like that is the logical next step to go of like, people are going to use drugs.
Right.
It's just going to happen. So let's provide the resources.
Well, yeah,
when-
our country chose the war on drugs. Other countries chose harm reduction.
Hello, Portugal.
Yeah.
So, the war on drugs has failed, I would say, it's fair to
Yeah,
say.
I guess if drugs were in a war with something, they're winning.
Oh, it's awful, the amount of
Drugs have
money
won.
and
Yes.
prison and everything else.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like we have an opportunity, harm reduction, you know, as an opportunity to change the narrative.
Right. I mean, I think her analogy to birth control is a really good one.
Yeah.
You know, you see places like New York where it's really common to see, you know, free condoms in bars and things
Yeah.
like that. You know, it could become, you know, as normal to see, you know, a Narcan
Yeah.
station or
Exactly.
something, you know, where it's just normal, like prevention at that point.
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah. We are almost out of time, but I did want to do a little bit of housekeeping. We did have a question from the audience that I wanted to maybe have Ms. Mona address. Just there was someone asked a question, where can they get Narcan? Maybe in like a more general sense. Like where can someone go to get Narcan?
If you happen to have a harm reduction agency in your community, go to that harm reduction agency. Now, here in Little Five Points, again, you can get a free Narcan kit from Little Five Points Pharmacy, 484 Moreland Avenue, Northeast Atlanta, Georgia, 30307. We, the Atlanta Harm Reduction Coalition, have a Sunday outreach, 11 to 12:30. We are near 426 Seminole Avenue that runs parallel to the west of Moreland, behind Clothing Warehouse near Little Five Points Pizza. And the address is actually the drugstore Vintage Clothing. We set up in that little cul-de-sac sidewalk right in front of drugstore Vintage Clothing. You can find out our locations at Atlanta Harm Reduction.org. Anyway, or just wander around Gregory Davis Plaza. It's a part of Gregory Davis Plaza where we set up Sundays 11:30 to 12. Wait, excuse me, 11 to 12:30. You can come to our offices. Again, find our address, atlantaharmreduction.org. If you are outside of the metro Atlanta area, you will go to our statewide partners, Georgia, spell out Georgia, overdoseprevention.org. That's Georgia, overdoseprevention.org. I heard Next Distro mentioned, yay! Because there's a whole lot of Georgia that has no access to sterile syringes, Narcan, and I believe that is Next, N-E-X-T, Distro, distro.org. But harm reduction is growing in Georgia. If you're around Athens, go to our friends, Access Point, Georgia. You're around Savannah, go to our friends, Savannah Harm Reduction / No More ODs. And I have a feeling I may be mixing up their name, but all that is in their name. Just Google, look up harm reduction, Georgia harm reduction, your zip code, see what pops up.
And I do want to mention too, some people do not want to go because they don't want to be outed. They don't want to pick up their Narcan from a syringe exchange. They don't want to go to the pharmacy. If you want Narcan and you don't ever want anyone to know you're getting Narcan, you can actually go on Amazon.com and order Narcan. It is not free.
This box averages $125 to $150 for this two-dose kit. That's why we make it a point, to give this away for free. In fact, this box here and many others like it is your Georgia tax dollars at work.
So as no, that's definitely applaudable. Sorry, I didn't.
It was just a little tap. Little taps.
We are just about out of time, but I wanted to give you, Sarah, the final word, just to talk about this project, to sort of give our audience, again, a bit of a conclusion of this moment. But before we even do that, I wanted to at least acknowledge all the Science Gallery Atlanta team, the Science Gallery International team, my co-curator in this exhibition, Hannah Redler-Hawes, over across the pond in the UK. But just wanted to thank all of you who are watching this, or who will watch this in the future via this live stream on YouTube, and to thank you all for your time in doing so. And I'll give Sarah the last word.
Sure. So thank you all for joining me today. I will say that, this kind of work is not done in isolation. It takes a village. I am so proud of my coworkers in Little 5 Points, and just of, these like independent, free-thinking, heathens that have just are so wonderful. I love Little 5 Points so much. I wouldn't be who I am without Little 5 Points. Having worked with Rob and Grant over the years, so thankful that everyone in Little 5 Points shared their story with me. I'm so thankful that along the way I met Miss Mona Bennett. She's been the most amazing harm reduction mentor, and it's such a privilege to get to do the work that I do. It's a privilege to go to a syringe exchange. It's a privilege to work in Vine City and Little 5 Points. it's a privilege to be an Emory nurse with a doctoral degree. I mean, I was a waitress like 10 years ago. I feel so grateful, and I'm excited to continue to work with communities to decrease stigma around drug use, and I want to come to a place where people don't die from using drugs anymore. That is like, it's got to stop. We got to find a way to decrease stigma and just keep people safe, you know? So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Science Gallery, Dr. Bruner, Floyd. Everybody's been so wonderful. You guys are an amazing team. It's so much fun to work with everybody. And thank you for coming. Thank you. And Joe, thank you all. I'm just grateful, incredibly grateful. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.